The previous session about sustainability in education was really important. I'm sure a lot of people had a lot of questions, but guys, time crunch here, so your questions will definitely be answered. You can just get in touch with us and send us your questions. But meanwhile, the next conversation is about change and to do with climate. So I'm really interested, and I'm sure you all will be super interested in this session. So firstly, let me introduce all the panelists. We have Ms. Miniya Chatterji, founder and CEO, Sustain Labs Paris, and an Indian author. Yes, she's going to be leading this session, guys. We have Ms. Mahua Acharya, Asia Director, Climate Policy Initiative. We also have Mr. Dhaval Monani, CEO, First Home Reality. We up next have Mr. Atul Bhatnagar, CEO, Sun Moksha. We also have Mr. Manish Kharbanda. He is an advisor, Jindal Steel and Power Limited. With these powerful speakers right there with us, let's get to start with the topic, a change good to resist, climate change and deforestation, which is also one of the need of the hours with the forest being just not available and the forest just catching fires and we humans not taking care of it. So let's get started with this. Over to you, Ms. Miniya Chatterji. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. I'm really delighted to be moderating a really fantastic panel today, and on which we will be discussing some of the solutions for making industries which probably today have the highest environmental footprint, and how do you make these sustainable. My panelists represent some of these industries, and also one of the panelists works with policymakers. So it's going to be an interesting discussion, I'm sure. Without further ado, I'll quickly introduce the panelists so we get into the discussion. I have the pleasure of introducing Manish Kharbanda. He is the advisor. He's an advisor to Jindal Steel and Power for several years. He was working at the company as part of the top management. There is Dhaval Monani. Dhaval, are you there? Dhaval Monani. He is CEO of First Home Reality Solutions, and he is a builder. He can tell us more about the construction sector. And interestingly, he's also one of India's finest, or rather India's finest experts on affordable housing. We have Atul Bhatnagar. He used to be the Chief Operating Officer of NSDC, National Skills Development Council, and he's now the CEO of Sun Moksha. Very interesting work, which I think during the discussion he can tell us more about. And finally, but not the least, there's Mahua Acharya. She would be joining us in 10 minutes. She's stuck in a meeting with the ministry, which is just a bit delayed. She is the Asia Director for Climate Policy Initiative, which works with policymakers. And earlier, she was with the ArcelorMittal Group and running their renewable energy fund. So I'll dive right into the questions. Manish, I'll start with you. You have extensive experience in mining, steel, and power. If there were two practices that you would like to highlight, whether from the legal point of view or from the technology point of view, that you think is making a difference in this sector that you are in making a difference in making the environment better, what would those be?
Thanks, Miniya. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks everybody else. Thanks, I think, Dhaval. I think we were the panelists are absolutely there to discuss this point. In fact, Miniya, in addition to the policy, I also handle the environmental aspects on the legal side. So as far as JSPL is considered, which is one of my clients, they have, you understand, they have steel plants and they have power plants. And a lot has changed in environment. So I will just give you a synoptic view of environment, which of course will be important. So, but as far as the two practices are concerned, on the steel side, I think I can look at, we have done a lot of heat recovery from units of the steel plant to generate power, which is commonly called WHRB. So basically you are actually recovering and generating power, which was earlier actually going into the environment. It was polluting the environment, it was getting waste. Then, of course, you will see that there is the JSPL was the first to pioneer the coal gasification plant. So that's the first in India, where, of course, if you see coal itself, it actually contributes a big way to the environment. And if you gasify it and then try to produce DRIs, I'm not going very technical because I'm not very sure whether we have technical experts here. But what, in a very layman's language, you use the coal, which is a very, very low GCP. GCP is the gross calorie value. This coal is not usable, and you use it in a coal gasification plant, which actually generates gas. Now, this gas can be used for making DRI directly. So these are the 2-3 things that JSPL was the pioneer in doing. Of course, there are other things like zero discharge, of course, from water, no water being taken from groundwater. So these are some of the things on the steel side. On the mining side, of course, you have the environment policies have been very, very strict from 2006 onwards. So it's very recent. It's not that something has been happening all through. It's been very recent, and I still believe a lot of gaps exist. We will talk as we take the discussion forward, Miniya.
And Manish, I think if I would have asked you for 3, you would have definitely mentioned the construction materials, which I remember when I was with the company,
yes.
With Hydropower, we developed it was all the construction materials were based on the principle of waste to wealth. And I would like to bring in Dhaval at this point. Dhaval, are there any ways to incorporate clean tech solutions in the construction industry in India? Construction industry anywhere in the world has one of the biggest carbon footprints, not just because of the materials, but also because of the methods and technologies. Any maybe 2 or 3 solutions that you would like to highlight, which you've seen in your experience?
So, Miniya, see, it's definitely possible to reduce the carbon footprint that we see in this various classifications that are there. LEED, Griha, and EDGE actually certify your processes, your design. But what happens is these sort of energy saving initiatives happen at a very high cost. Now, the biggest mistake that our industry has done till now is not gone back to the basics and try to incorporate this from grounds up, right from planning, from designing. Because the way your home is designed actually dictates a lot of materials you use. And the other mistake that we usually do is we track the carbon footprint of materials used rather than the lifetime effect.
I'll move to Atul. Hi Atul, thanks for joining us on this panel. The World Bank it estimates that the regional growth fall in South Asia is going to be about 1.8 to 2.8% in 2020 because of the pandemic, because of the effect of the pandemic. And when we recover, I'm wondering what form of economy is that going to be? Is that going to be focused on a job recovery? Or are we also going to, give enough attention to the ecosystem? We've seen this in the past in the World War. A lot of the recovery, economic growth that had happened was completely negligent of the economy. So you have a lot of experience on skills and jobs, and how do you see this going?
The COVID is like, the technology disruption. I mean, I would say we have to reimagine and reboot the entire ecosystem itself. So what happened before, and I would see a silver lining in this migrant labor relocation back to the villages. First of all, not everybody's gone back. A significant population has gone back, but India is such a place where there's so much of population anyway that you will find alternates there. And before the COVID world, anyway, you were seeing that the unemployment was rising. So there are a number of people who were, let's say, looking for jobs. Now, from the skill development side, let me give you a macro picture that I was with NSTC, we were battling with at that time. First is fresh skilling. There were nearly 1 million people joining the workforce every month for a period of 10 years, of which 7 or 8 years have already gone. So we are already seeing people joining the workforce who need fresh skill development. Then there are people who need to be reskilled. And again, I'm talking about the pre-COVID world. So these problems already exist.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you speak a little more loudly, and maybe the mic could be a little close to your mouth?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
It's loud and clear.
Yeah. So now with fresh skilling is one challenge. Second is reskilling. Reskilling means basically there are places where the jobs and no skilled workers like caterpillars and your heavy machinery and your logistic trucks. There aren't very many people around for doing that kind of job. And there is oversupply, like in the BPO world. There are people who trained in BPO and can't find jobs now because the BPO industry itself is undergoing a major slump. So we need to reskill these people. And the third one is recognition of prior learning. Now that becomes a very important thing, especially with the Indian situation, because the number of people who are certified skilled are less than 5% in India. In South Korea, they're 95%. In Japan, it's like 80s. In Germany, it's 70s. In US, it's 68. Whatever, they're various percentages. But India is less than 5%. When I say certified skilled, all these migrant laborers, they might be very skilled in doing what they were doing in the urban side, and now they've gone back to the village side. But when they were working here, I mean, to get a carpenter, a plumber, or a welder, etc., you could only trust them that they know the job, and they would have known the job. If they're coming from Mumbai, they have to exist in a very competitive world, but they did not have a certificate to show. So if that is certified, then the Indian skilled population certified would go up. It's not that India doesn't have skill, because they have very many, but we don't have it certified. We don't have a percentage. We don't have a number to quote, because so many skilled people are there. So that's one big advantage we can get by certifying the skilled people who have gone back to the villages. Second, we should now look at reimagining the India that we are going to see post-COVID, where the villages refuel the let's say the growth in the urban areas. So the villages can be, and a cluster of villages, I'm not talking of each village, I'm talking of cluster villages, can get together to form microeconomic zone. Now our finance,
very interesting. Yeah,
our finance minister has alluded to that, talking about food economic zones.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a very big possibility, that you can have food economic zones in certain areas where a certain type of food is grown, whether it's fruits, vegetables, or wheat, or whatever it may be. Now,
Atul, I'll come back to that point, because that leads me into something else that I want to ask you about. But it's super interesting what you just said of rural India becoming hubs of growth rather than people from rural India migrating to the cities as labor, right? And, I just wanted to connect that to, again, back to you, Manish, because you also manage the CSR portfolio. Or you used to earlier. Do you still manage a CSR portfolio? You used to manage so many portfolios.
There are many portfolios that are also.
Yes, but a lot of big corporations, probably other clients of yours, are also skilling, in India. Do you think that actually has an impact, on sustainability in India? I mean, and I'm also broadening the definition of sustainability, not just to environmental sustainability, but also social sustainability.
Yeah, Miniya, it does. So I will give you a few examples on how the government is now latching onto it and catching on to Atul's point and how really things are changing. So I'll take some examples of JSPL, although there are numerous others and other organizations are also doing the same. We actually had set up a vocational training college, skill development college, which the Chhattisgarh government funds for our plants at Raigad. So the villagers are actually contributing a great deal in getting skilled around that, and they're finding gainful employment. As far as CSR is concerned, the socio-economic development that we do around the villages, one that is mandated. So mandated is something which you do by force. One is something where you do it on your own self. So I think I can proudly say that in our plants, we have been very fortunate because the promoter, Mr. Jindal, happens to be having a political plus an industrial background. So he understood the breadth very well. So we have given a lot of training and industrialization, small micro industries to the women. For example, we actually have empowered them to build sanitary pads and distribute. That is one. They make candles and items related to that, and that we market from Jindal under the CSI initiative. So in terms of looking at training, I said the vocational training colleges are doing a great job. And we have a special unit on vocational training, on reskilling and skilling the workforce, and so that they stay in the areas and there is no migration. Because just latching on, if you see the kind of migration that happened, both as at the time of COVID and people were scared, I think it would be better if we keep the population there. Because this Miniya decongests the main cities. You create an environment which sustains when it was under lockdown. See, under lockdown, you see how the environment evolved. And it is only the population pressure which is leading that the metro is getting so, the environment is getting like it impacted in such a big way that you find that even breathing is becoming difficult. So this kind, I think, while every adversity has an opportunity, I would say that COVID has this great opportunity where the corporates can pitch in. I think the government through the Manrega scheme is actually pitching in where they are generating employment. So now you need to do skilling. So if it's the corporates through their CSR funds plus government contributions who reskill people, because in India, as rightfully said, you have many people, but you don't have skilled people. A combination of that can build a much more sustainable uh, ecosystem, at least start at a cluster level and then keep on developing at the macro level.
Great, Manish. So you're reinforcing what Atul also said about rural India becoming hubs of growth. Very interesting. Dhaval, if your sound, if your mic is now working, you want to just complete your examples of clean technologies in the construction sector, and also I would love to hear from you your comments on we're talking about rural India. And which there the economic growth, where there are largely economically disadvantaged groups often staying. So the what is the any comments on the dichotomy between affordability and sustainability, and especially in the construction sector? Can we make affordable housing and give shelter to all? Along with making sure that there are certain environmental aspects that are also brought in.
Miniya, as I was saying, that one particular thing that we have to go down to look at sustainability on a broad scale, when we talk about affordable, we realize that 90% of the shortfall of housing in India, and going ahead, more than 90% of the housing needed will be in the affordable sector. And when I mean affordable, I don't mean it in terms of what a lot of developers talk about. What I mean is that what our people in our cities, the workers can afford, which is actually sub 10 lakh, sub 15 lakh rupee homes. What we find that if we want to make them sustainable, be energy efficient, and have a lower carbon footprint, we have to look at the lifetime, footprint of that building and its impact on people, rather than just the one-time cost, because the one-time cost will always be higher. And we've seen as an example over the last 10 years in particular that India used to be a country that used to be reliant on fired clay bricks and the whole shift to cement. Now we are one of the only countries that hasn't taken into account that shifting to cement, which is a much lower carbon footprint, and having walls made of cement has a huge ongoing impact in terms of cooling, in terms of thermal insulation. A lot of other countries that went through this transition, they used insulation materials and changed the fundamental way of construction, which we haven't. So going ahead, we'll have to, accept that, to make housing more sustainable, we have to redesign them from grounds up. Second thing, there will be some cost, but that cost will be far offset by the lifetime cost that building goes through. And that's where the government needs to come in, because that lifetime cost will be borne partially, if not completely, by the government. And by incentivizing developers and investors to offset that initial investment right now, will have much far-reaching consequences. When you say about rural, there's been some study that even we had done. We were pitching some projects, and we realized that the standalone models of housing that are present in rural India are much more efficient than our urban high-rise models. And as it turns out, they are much more cheaper as well. Now, the government is, says that there's a shortfall of 20 million houses in the rural landscape. I think they will be much more sustainable and much more efficient than what we are building in urban areas.
Very interesting. Dhaval, one follow-up. I know that we work closely together, and I know that you're very skilled and passionate about PPPs, about doing public-private partnerships, especially in housing. So when you talk about costs of constructing sustainable houses versus the lifetime costs, any ideas, maybe one or two ideas about how do you structure PPPs around this?
let's say so when I say PPPs, you have to take into account that you have to incentivize two people to adopt this. One is the developer, who actually is just is a transient person in this. He doesn't have any long-standing skin in the game. It's the end user. Now the government, if they can just bring in incentives that offset the initial cost to the end user. Now, we are all aware, and I think at least not all, but somebody like me in the construction space is aware of the huge work the government has done through the subsidy they give to first-time home buyers. Now, if that subsidy model can be tweaked for homes that comply to a certain level of sustainability, that would go a huge way. Now, you can do it by incentivizing the developer, the investor, or the end user. It's for from our perspective, that's one and the same. But that's one of the only ways to do it, because the lifetime saving, let's say in terms of energy, in terms of water in particular, we've seen it in Chennai, which faced a water crisis, is huge for the government. Right now, even in Gujarat, in the northern state of district of Kutch, they are pumping in water from Narmada, from south of Gujarat. So there's huge incentives for the government to do this, but they need to structure it right, and it has to be from the developer, the investor's perspective.
Yeah, great. Thanks. And I would like to welcome Mahua, who's just come in. And I think Dhawal's comment is a nice segue into Mahua's work, who's been a part of large industries, including ArcelorMittal and the US as well in the energy sector. And now you're working closely with the ministry and in the policy area. Mahua, any comments on what Dhawal said? Do you see any do you see a positive trend in the ministries in India and how they are tackling environment? Any broad comments on that?
Thank you for having me on this panel. Let me respond some thoughts on is there a positive change within the ministries? I just got off, and it's it's so timely. I just got off an event that was with MOEFCC again on the occasion of World Environment Day, together with the UN Environment Program, and lots of conviction from MOEFCC. The panel, however, lamented that in the economic package that has just been released, there just isn't enough that's green. In fact, one person lamented that there's nothing in it, in fact. So I would say the answer is more like yes and no. In the energy sector, where I spend a fair bit of time, there is the level, I continue to be surprised at the level of developments, the kind of developments. Sometimes they're more rapid than I had ever assumed. And if I were to look at this over a little bit of time, I think one gets a bit caught up in India, because if you're a developer, every day there are issues that you're facing. You kind of lose sight of time. In a matter of 10 years, India has done so much on renewables that it kind of went the opposite, the other direction. Prices went so low, the tariffs went down to such affordable levels that we now have a completely normal mainstream conversation of renewables versus coal. I never thought that would be possible, not in my professional career at least. I just thought for the longest time that I would just spend my time talking about renewable energy and its virtues.
Manish, would you like to come in while
Yeah. So,
because she mentioned coal. Any comments from you, and also about these myths around deforestation and reforestation, some good practices there? That I think that would be very interesting for our viewers.
yeah, let me just carry on to what Mahua has said. I think what she was trying to say on the renewables, that's an important part of it, because you see a lot of thermal-based coal plants there, which are of course there, and we have to be very careful because the world over the coal technologies are changing. So renewables basically up till very recently had actually solar in a big way. You had wind in some part of it. Hydro was not a part of us in terms of renewables, is just coming. So, and the rates at which, the renewables is getting picked up by the industry, of course, it's mandated as per law to at least have 10%. But the rates, of course, of hydro have come down to as low as 2.5 rupees, 2.5, right? While earlier in all the project plans, it used to be 5.5. So what she was trying to say is that the pace at which we have adopted some of the practices is far higher than in other. So awaiting to a balanced growth is something what she's saying that, in my view, a let her join in. A balanced growth in India is something which we wish to see, because that is something which I again miss. So thermal plants, of course, are there in abundance. We have coal in abundance, but we all know that coal has its own disadvantages. So, and of course, India has a lot of sunlight, so solar is being encouraged. We see that almost this is catching on in a big way, but solar will have its own limitations for sure. So similarly, wind of course requires a lot of space, and there's a lot of research in the wind space also. But then also, it requires a lot of time, efforts, and energy. You cannot have big plans to replace the thermal part of it. So what I see as an opportunity in India in terms of renewables is hydro, and of course solar. So that is something which I see a big thing which can bring about a change, and slowly we'll try to see that the renewable power obligations to power generators is increased gradually. That will actually slow down the coal, and we would see that this new technologies chip in. Of course, there have been other recent developments, but I'm not aware to that. As far as the Ministry of Environment, Miniya is concerned, we deal with them. Of course, I've been dealing with them for quite some time. As I said, that the environmental standards for industries started in '94, which was the EIA of '94, and it was not taken very seriously unless and until the Supreme Court, which is the topmost court, came on very heavily in the MC Mehta case, a very popular case, and sometimes in 2004, which led to the 2006 EIA, which is still in circulation, which actually demands a public consultation, and there are other ways, very, very strict standards of environment. And it was said that, listen, now you cannot start an industry unless and until the clearances are in place, and the environmental standards became very stringent. But yet you see why now the problem is that, why do these measures are there if they are all there, but yet we find that not everybody, but not across the in the application is uniform. You find that there are still people who find their way through laws, who are very deceptive in their nature, and the MOEF lets it go. And why is the pace, as what Bahua said, on MOEF not that fast? They may limit whatsoever, right? Well, that's fair. Everybody feels that they don't have the right funds, they don't have the right technology. But the idea is that what you have, are you sweating those assets? That's the most important. Otherwise, you can always keep on complaining, nothing is going to change. So the biggest problem today is that why industries are afraid of MOEF is because the clearances take ages. And you can sit, earlier it used to be around, for mining I can tell you, it used to be about 3 to 4 years, which has now come down to around 2 years, but yet the files keep on moving and nothing happens. So the online monitoring has just recently started, of course, where proposals go online, but it is still very easy. So if the intent is not there, you can keep on raising the EDS, which is you can ask for information, and it keeps on happening. So I think suffering is there. Second is that we are not evolving at the pace in these where they are the nodal ministry. We are not evolving at a pace where we take expedient action. If, for example, MOEF still will give a proposed expansion, even if the land does not belong to you, and tomorrow I apply through a different subsidiary company and apply for from the same land, I get a separate EC without the MOEF looking at the full picture, because his name has changed. So they don't have measures to integrate, to look at it holistically, and still the industry will always take advantage. The third point is also that the judicial activism which has happened has actually pushed the environmental change. Otherwise, everybody was in slumber, at least in India, I can tell you. The judicial activism, the Supreme Court coming very heavily, the NGT becoming very, very heavily on environmental issues. But yet, if you see while the environment, this ED Act was not the PML, there is a provision for air and water pollution, but we have not seen much happening on the ED on air and water pollution, because it has to be tightened. The noose has to be tightened. The judicial system has to be more expedient, and the MOEF should have more teeth. I would understand that the EP Act 1986 itself has only a couple of powers in Section 5 and Section 19, which actually needs to be strengthened. And it has to be, if there is somebody who's perpetuating fraud, it should go to investigative agencies, and it should actually be done in a manner which is very expedient. then you can push the change. So that is what. So on the renewable side, just told you about it. MOE, these are the issues where they need to take action. Otherwise, they slow the pace. And once you slow the pace, the government sees that they're not getting pace. They are just kept on they keep on doing things. Industry takes advantage. And then the legal systems have to be built. The EP Act needs to deserve a relook where the retribution is far higher, and people should not try to attempt to violate environmental conditions, because you see that environment has an impact on everybody. Everyone is impacted by environment, and you see 2020 has not been a good year, and this year of biodiversity, as has been declared, it's been a very difficult year for, right from the fires that happened in Havana and Australia to the COVID pandemic. You see earthquakes are happening, the cyclones are coming, the entire climate is changing. Why? Because this aspect has been neglected, and now the nature is taking its way back. So I would feel that these are the areas where I think we need to be concentrating much more.
Manish, thank you. And some of the two big takeaways from what you said is that it's on both sides, industry as well as policy, it's the intent versus compliance, on both sides, I think. And the second is just lethargy in the process. You need to move faster. Thank you. And, that leads me to Atul, because, in your new avatar after skills, you're a champion of renewable energy and fintech. And that in rural India. So, it's very interesting as a comparison to what we're talking about now, which is more in industry. Maybe just two examples of how do we ensure energy security in rural India, and in a way that's done, in a clean manner.
The issue we're trying to solve here is, can the rural environment support itself sustainably? And for that, because the sun is available everywhere, so you don't have to provide sun from anywhere else. The problem with the Indian government's policy is they have poured so many lakhs and crores in getting this electricity, putting up power plants in Gujarat and wherever, and hauling them all over to the Assam, and only 25% reaches there. There's so much of distribution losses in between. And then to go to the remote areas. Now, what we're saying is, in the villages, can we have smart microgrids? Smart microgrid means that there is a controlling and monitoring mechanism by which you generate electricity using local resources of the village itself. So sun becomes a clear winner anyway. If there's livestock, then you put biomass. If there is, there is a more of biogas or biomass or hydro, whichever may be the other complement to it, and then provide that energy within the village for economic development. I am not looking for charging mobile phones. I'm not looking for providing fans and ACs or microwaves. I'm looking at energy to power the fields, and fields such that not all the fields get powered at the same time with water. We do a distribution of water. So the scheduling happens. Some fields get powered at 9 o'clock, some get watered at 10 o'clock, some at 11 o'clock. So the same amount of water or the same source is being used. So there's water conservation and there's water distribution, which happens as per the farmer's needs. Once the farmer produces something, then that is then taken to a cold storage somewhere. The cold storage requires 24/7 reliable energy. There is no doubt about that. So even if the government is providing 8 hours of electricity, you don't know when it's coming, what power, what voltage. Here we are providing a stable energy. And that we're doing through IoT devices and through cloud. Now, this is not a model. This is already working from 2016 onwards in a village called Chutki in Odisha. It's in the middle of an elephant reserve. There are 150 households, 600 people. They never had electricity till date, never. And then we went ahead and we had to literally dig the trenches, put in the electricity wires and the electricity poles, etc. But that village was already seeing a reverse migration happening, because the youth, instead of working outside, they were ready to come back to the village and start a photocopying machine, putting a small retail shop, starting something on food processing itself, making wheat into atta, selling that, adding value at source. So why should you sell milk as milk? Sell milk as paneer, paneer as cheese, and for that you need a 24/7 reliable cold room. You need some food processing machines. Women get empowered. Women can go out, not large distances, small distances, sell.
Nice.
Do pickle making, food, juice making, etc. So what I'm saying is, each village with or each set of villages, I'm not taking each village will have a microgrid. Let's say a cluster of 15 villages converge to a microeconomic zone, powered through a smart microgrid, using renewable energy and producing value.
Excellent.
And that economic value
spoke.
goes back to the villages.
Yeah, hub and spoke model, great.
Yes.
And I would like to contrast that with the cities in India. Mawa, welcome back. And you moved into Delhi and from Bangalore, and both are equally polluted, but I guess Delhi is more polluted. Any comments on the environmental degradation in Delhi, and especially looking at air quality? And this is a very personal question, because it's a question that's personal to me, because I actually exited Delhi because of the air pollution. Just like you have a child, and I kind of exited. But I would love to hear from you on this.
So air pollution is, of course, very, it's like the issue became personal, and suddenly it felt different. I have a young child, and my family was split in for 3 months at the end of last year. They went away to Bangalore because it was 900 plus in Delhi, and I have no idea what that kind of air pollution level will do to the lungs of my little child. It just didn't feel right as a parent to not make some difficult decisions. It's not nice to be away from your kids. So they went away to Bangalore. Now, I understand. I had the privilege of that kind of situation. We have a home in Bangalore. We're from Bangalore. We live in Delhi right now, but not everybody does. Air pollution, sadly, has now become so serious an issue. I would go to the extent of sort of saying that it's everybody's problem, yet nobody's problem. I came out of a panel on World Environment Day, and I must say nobody talked about air pollution. So have we forgotten about it? Are we just, as Indians, is resilient? Or are we blasé? Or is it a sense of hopelessness? Which of these is it? It can't be all of them, because to address something, you have to find the lever. So where does air pollution sit? I might even say, well, there are many drivers, there are many levers that we have. There are many trigger points for doing something about air pollution. Let me start with first recognizing the problem. I think everybody recognizes the problem. There are not enough monitors. So do we recognize the problem seriously enough? Maybe not. But we do recognize the problem. And in the end of the year, yes, a lot of people suddenly were talking about air pollution. And now a lot of people during the lockdown were talking about the value of just being able to breathe outside. Second, what can we do about it? There was, for some years, an energy efficiency scheme, a training scheme for energy efficiency, where companies were able to trade their energy efficiency certificates. Before this panel started, I thought, let me just go and see what is the liquidity on a market. So I'm looking at trying to do something about air pollution from the point of view of the market, using some incentives to get people to find better ways of doing business, using market-based way to do it. And I found that in the last 2 years, the liquidity in that system has plummeted. So why is it? We had a fantastic opportunity, and I don't think we've lost it, but I think we still have this fantastic opportunity to take things like that, and the natural evolution of that is an emissions trading scheme. For air pollution, there are just 2 ways to do this. It's tried and tested. You can either just simply have air quality control regulations, or you can put it out into the market. We do have air quality control regulations. Our power plants were supposed to desulfurize. We have this huge flue gas desulfurization program, and really have a look at how many power plants have in fact been retrofitted. And now that solar is so cheap, and now that renewables is doable even with batteries, this is really a time to have that same conversation around retrofitting some of these old plants with the additional context of air pollution. So 2 levers have changed. Renewables, that means the cleaner alternatives, has now become normal, mainstream, and affordable, and even cheaper. And yet, as individuals and policymakers, as people in decision-making places, we have this opportunity now to look at programs like that, which are otherwise a little bit technical. I mean, they're like the coal sector. To talk about the coal sector and retrofitting is a seriously technical matter. I mean, if you talk to power engineers, you get caught in numbers really quickly. But the legitimacy of bringing in air pollution and concerns around air pollution should be now. I think that's our crisis is, we have many crises, but the current crisis that nobody appears to own is air pollution. And I might even say, you know, I've thought about this for a while. I might even say perhaps the way to start to do something serious about it is that the announcements, the ambitions, the desires need to come from the very, very, very top. That's what happened with renewables. When this particular government took office, is only when the announcements from the top started changing that renewables became mainstream discourse. It became quite normal for environmentalists to talk about renewables without otherwise having been bucketed into more expensive technology, green technology that's only for other nations, not for us. You know, those questions are out of the window right now. Air pollution is our issue. So I would almost appeal to people like yourselves, to people on the panel, that there is an opportunity, and the onus is on us to now find the right kind of or the right type of opportunity to raise the issue around air pollution, whether it's in the context of health, whether it's become personal to you, whether it's such a serious problem that needs collective action. Really, we have to move away from only doing the numbers and finding exactly what the data is, to really seriously sitting down and saying, you know, we have to just get our hands around this problem. And it's no rocket science. It's been done in a lot of countries all over the world.
Yeah, I was reading, thank you, Mo. I was reading Sunita Narayan's book, and a line which really caught my attention, and I think it's very relevant, is that we've got so caught up in the problem, and she's talking about air pollution, that we've lost sight of the solution. And I think that last 10 minutes of our session today, we've got to wrap up in 9 minutes, I would just like to, have all our panelists give a little bit of, share your thoughts on how some of the innovations as well as policy changes in your sector towards making your industry more environment friendly, how much of a real impact is that making on the environment? Because I really truly feel that sometimes we're just getting so caught up. I mean, carbon trading, you mentioned emissions trading, I can just go on that conversation. But I feel like we just get so caught up in that, and we're losing sight on the fact that, like you said, air quality is just off our radar. And so I'll start with you, Dhaval, in construction industry. Some of the techniques, you talked about a few techniques, policy changes. How is that actually making a difference on the environment, or is that just paperwork?
Actually, a lot of it is counterproductive, very funnily. So, see, there's a very weird law out in most municipalities in Gujarat that you have to put solar water heaters in any building that is constructed. Now, what they discount completely is that, that's a sort of a communal expense, and when people use it, the builders put up the cheapest solar heater on the market, of 50 to 100 liters every time apartment uses water. So, a lot of the policies that government has brought in has not brought in from the ground, taking I would say the people into account. So it's had a very superficial impact. The only impact noticeably that in the whole country as which is very environmentally friendly. So there are very few and far between measures, but overall it's been very superficial and not well thought of.
Anish, you want to go next? There's also a question in the chat box about what tree cover percentage we should ideally have related to your mining experience.
So a couple of things, I think let's go one by one on this. So in our sectors, of course, steel and mining, I would say that there have been some very good measures. There's a real-time monitoring. So they are real-time monitors of air, other pollutants. It goes to the SPCB and the CPCB, and they can monitor it. And I think there has been a noticeable impact in these sectors. As far as the mining sector is concerned, you will understand that DMF funds which were introduced actually have a lot of unutilized funds, but they are utilizing is for the socio-economic developments and also on environment. Been very, very strict. Forest equally strict. I'm not saying that there may be few defaulters, but I think both the forest has done a much, much better job in my personal view. Very strict compliances, and you would find very efficient officers down the line. And there is a complete, in the mining sector, you see a lot of improvement because I've been seeing mining from ages, and I've seen it in all the countries worldwide. So I think we are getting very, very close to that as far as these sectors are concerned. There's a lot of pressure from regulations, and I think that's the only way. Otherwise, coming to what Mahua was saying, uh, in a country like ours, we have to take a call because it's bounded by the constitution, which are the three main, the judiciary, the bureaucracy, and the executive. There has to be a balance. That balance is never achieved. So sometimes if you stop our industry and environment and try to penalize, they will say industry is closing, employment will be lost, becomes a social cause, and then the NGOs pitch in somewhere. So basically the balance is not being found, and that is why you see that a lot of environmental measures that happen are happening because of the judicial activism. It is pushed down your throat and then you do it. And ultimately, I think that's the way that you keep on putting some measures, which are statutory measures, which becomes habits, and those habits are taken as a part of the ecosystem. So a lot of, I think, good work done by the government of India on pollution, but a lot remains. And I think forums like this and people like you, Miniya, Mahua, and others actually have to really, the group has to expand, because today, if you talk about environment, people talk about it, but nobody wants to do it. They say, and the tendency here is, leave me outside, I'll do it for everybody else. So that's happening. So I think that is something which to be seen. As far as the tree cover is concerned, they have been a very recent Supreme Court judgment on degrassing. So that's also being added to all the environmental clearances, where they have said that once you leave, then you have to completely do the degrassing of the entire area, which was there in some form. Now it's being mandated in the mining lease itself. As well as the number of trees that can go per hectare, the current norm is about 2,400 per hectare. That's the maximum you can do. Otherwise, and there is a mortality rate, so it takes into factor. To a specific question that you pointed out, it's about 2,400 per hectare.
Thank you. Thank you. Atul, it'd be great if you would go next on this question of changes that you see in your sector, linking it to the real impact on the environment. And also, I'll just weave in a question. Actually, 2-3 people have asked about the impact of hydro, power, and the build-up related to hydropower on the ecology, especially in rural India. So, if you could maybe answer both together.
Yeah, sure. First is, going back to the initial comment I made, that rural India should be the new engine of growth. And for that, I would re-emphasize the use of consistent energy, and to be able to think that 5 lakh villages will be electrified through the main grid is, it's a dream. I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. So we have to look at decentralized energy produce so that economic development can happen. And when I say economic development, I would kind of dream of having, let's say, orange juice from Nagpur, because the Nagpur Santra is the best, so you get that, and that comes directly back from Nagpur, rather than ITC or Real Fruit or somebody else giving me a branded orange juice, or Alfonso mango packed and packaged where it is being produced itself. So for all of this, we have to have a decentralized form of branded stuff that we can come out from there. For this, the policy needs to change. The policy of the Indian government is only grid electricity. We have to put it into smart microgrid, not even microgrid. Smart microgrid means you have a monitoring and control over that particular piece of land or village that we are talking, or cluster of villages we are talking about. Second is innovation itself. The bureaucrats are so scared of recognizing innovation. They don't have an innovation recognizing policy because there's only one thing. So they don't have a tender and 3 tenders and some kind of comparisons in L1, etc., all those kind of things. So they don't know what innovation is all about. And if you can't recognize innovation, then you can't fund it. You can't even progress it. So it's all in VCs sides and corporate sides. And of course, there are people who get taken for a ride. They have to put some 3x and 10x kind of returns. But what about the government having to support that? And when we say the Indian brain is the best in the world, then innovation should be there. And innovation should be recognized. For me, Jugaad plus skills is equal to innovation, because Jugaad, you see some of the pictures and it just blows your mind. How can somebody think of doing something like this? Now, can we make it replicable? Can we make it scalable? For that, we need
called frugal innovation, right?
Yeah, there's some things which come out, even on your WhatsApp. University produces enough of those pictures where people have tweaked around small things and made it something very, very out of the world kind of stuff. Can I do it? Can I do it at hundreds times that particular value or number? Then that's the kind of thing we want to do. For that, innovation needs patient capital from the government, because the government is not asking for 3x return in 10 months and all that bit. That is where.
Thanks, sir.
That is the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Point taken. Mawa, we'll just end with you with this billion-dollar question, that all these efforts and policy and then, industry and some of the things, I think one of the important points which came out of the session is, incentive-driven sustainability through policy or through through subsidies or through market mechanisms that you mentioned. Are they actually having a real impact on the environment? And in your sector, for example, the PAT scheme a few years ago that the government had come up with, and I think they implemented it rather well. I remember I was there at JSPL at that time. They implemented it rather well. But has that converted into a real difference in the quality of the environment in India?
The answer is yes and no, of course. But I hate yes and no answers, because then there's too much on the table and you don't know what to take away. The one thing that I would say, there are just two things. To answer your question, well, the PAT scheme and these schemes like that, the stuff that works in India are messages from the top. And I think that's first and foremost, because that message from the top, first and foremost, makes not, what does it mean to make something mainstream? It means that entrepreneurs get up and they do something. A policy may or may not come out. Even if a policy does come out, and assuming it does come out, it may not be perfect, but a policy does come out. After a policy comes out, there is a bit of budget allocation for it. The markets start gearing up for it. So message from the top is so key. It's proven with renewables. And look at electric mobility. That message only came from the top. And markets are responding. If you dig around to see what do we have in electric mobility, it started with announcements. So this country responds to messages from the top. Second, citizen engagement. I would say there are so many matters that bother people. We have this elephant that just died. I mean, it's how do you address savagery? Is it an environmental issue? But wildlife protection is an environmental matter. Air pollution is an environmental matter. Climate change is an environmental matter. They have been addressed through different instruments. But by and large, when you say environment, sadly, it kind of sits amongst only some people. There's a lot of thinking in us that, it's kind of not really my problem, or I don't know what to do with it, or my CSR people will do something, or let's give money to some school and put an environmental program. That's just a patchwork. It will end up in a smorgasbord of all kinds of little initiatives. The power of citizen engagement is not to be underestimated. And when I say citizen engagement, of course, I'm not expecting rural India to get up and say we care about the environment. There's a very different dialogue there. It's urban India, the filth on our streets, the filth in the air. I'm not even going into really serious regular sectors, energy sector and these large scale sectors. I think there's a very large room for just normal citizen engagement, citizens getting up and just saying that, sorry, this is a plastic that I don't want.
Yeah.
Because only then can you get just a better colony to live in, a better building to live in, a better welfare association to deal with, and just a much better environment to.
Thank you, Mawa. Guys, we've run out of time. I could just go on this conversation. And thank you so much, all of you, for keeping it real. you know, I'm disclaimer, I'm really not the biggest fan of Environment Days and Mother's Days and stuff, but I think it's conversations like these that really highlight the real issues. So thank you so much for being frank and for sharing some of the solutions and innovations that are happening in your sector. Thank you. Thank you, business world.